"You can't stop this chairlift, Mr. Prescott. The board's decision is final." Those were the exact words HOA President Clarissa Hawthorne shouted at me, standing on my front lawn, as a young couple smiled down from the brand-new chairlift passing directly over my roof. She thought her authority was unshakable. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just a retired old man. I was a retired Hollywood audio engineer, and I was about to turn their million-dollar investment into the most feared chairlift in America. Let me take you back to the beginning. I'm Samuel Prescott. After 35 years of crafting sound effects for some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters, I retired in 2020 with 2 Academy Award nominations and enough savings to buy my dream home. A timber frame cabin nestled in the Colorado wilderness, in a private community called Silver Pine Estates. This wasn't just any cabin. It was built from hand-hewn Douglas fir, perched on 3 unspoiled acres with unobstructed views of Mount Wilson. The fireplace was a masterpiece of natural stone, taking 6 weeks for a master mason to construct. Every window was strategically placed to capture the golden light at sunrise. After decades spent locked in soundproof studios bringing someone else's vision to life, this was finally my sanctuary. My wife, Helen, who had stood by me through countless deadlines and long nights, found joy in the expansive garden beds. Her rheumatoid arthritis had worsened over the years, but gardening in raised beds was her therapy, her joy. "This is where I'll heal," she said on the day we moved in. The community seemed perfect. Retirees, second homeowners, and nature lovers filled Silver Pine Estates with peace and camaraderie. The HOA was initially focused on road upkeep and preserving the rustic feel of the place. I read every word of the covenant before signing, no mention of future development or airspace easements. For the first 2 years, life was idyllic. I built a workshop to restore vintage audio gear. Helen's garden bloomed. Our adult kids came home for holidays. We'd earned this peace. Then Clarissa Hawthorne moved in. A former resort developer from Jackson Hole, she wasted no time working her way onto the HOA board. Within 6 months, she was president. The first warning sign came while I was away visiting my brother in Denver. Orange flag stakes sliced across my land in a diagonal line. No notice, no explanation. Just strangers who had entered my property while I was gone. At the HOA office, Clarissa's assistant looked uneasy when I asked about them. "You'll need to speak with Ms. Hawthorne directly," she said. Clarissa called me back 3 days later, her tone falsely cheerful. "Just preliminary planning for a winter recreation enhancement," she chirped. Nothing to worry about yet. But I did worry, especially when trucks started showing up at the community lodge, unloading concrete forms, steel cables, and mechanical parts. When I asked a worker what was happening, he shrugged. "Chairlift installation. Supposed to be ready before first snow." The truth hit like a hammer at a weekday morning meeting, scheduled conveniently while most residents were at work. I rearranged a medical appointment to attend. Only 8 of 70 residents showed up. Clarissa stood before a massive easel, revealing architectural plans for Silver Pines, exciting new amenity, a chairlift that would span from North Ridge to South Slope, cutting directly over my home. There was my cabin on the map, with the lift line passing squarely overhead. "This will increase winter accessibility and property values," Clarissa announced. "The board has unanimously approved the project." I stood up. "This crosses directly over my home. I received no notification. And there's nothing in the covenants about this." She smiled thinly and slid a document across the table. Section 38, Paragraph C grants the board easement rights for community improvements. And letters were sent in April. Perhaps you missed yours. I hadn't. I also knew that Paragraph C was part of a clarification update passed last year. Homeowners were told it didn't change anything. Outside the meeting, Tom Albright, my neighbor and a retired judge, leaned in close. "This isn't right," he whispered. "She's running this like a private company. Her husband's firm is doing the construction, and her brother sits on the county commission. Be careful." The next morning, I hired James O'Malley, one of Colorado's top property rights attorneys. After reviewing the documents, his assessment was grim. They've exploited a legal gray area. The easement language is vague. Courts usually side with HOAs, especially when they claim it benefits the majority. Still, we filed an emergency injunction. The judge, a golfing buddy of Clarissa's brother, I later learned, denied it within 48 hours. Construction accelerated. Concrete support towers were poured overnight. Ancient spruce trees at the edge of my property were cut down. I reported environmental violations and permit inconsistencies, but inspections were mysteriously canceled. One honest inspector pulled me aside. "Check the permits. What they're building doesn't match what was approved. He was right. The plan said the lift would maintain a 50-foot clearance from all structures. The actual construction brought the cable path within 20 feet of my roof. So close, riders would be able to look directly into our bedroom skylight. We returned to court, armed with this evidence. Same judge. Same result. Dismissed. Meanwhile, Helen grew more distressed. The workers' noise and presence made gardening unbearable. One evening, I found her crying quietly beside her neglected planters. "They've got the system locked up," I told her. But systems aren't the only way to fight. A few days later, Clarissa arrived in her black Range Rover, flanked by the Millers, a young couple from North Ridge testing the lift before its grand opening. "Mr. Prescott," she called, walking toward me in heels unsuited for gravel. "We'd like to go over final preparations before the launch. There's nothing to discuss. This lift shouldn't be here." She gestured grandly at the cables overhead. "It is here. It will transform our community. It's turned my home into a peep show," I said. "Progress always has trade-offs," she replied smoothly. "But the board has approved a generous compensation package. Landscaping credits, complimentary lift passes, adjusted HOA dues." I didn't touch the envelope. I don't want compensation. I want privacy. Her smile disappeared. "That's no longer an option. The lift opens Saturday. I suggest you invest in curtains." She turned to leave. "This isn't over," I called after her. "It was over the moment the board voted," she said without turning. That night, I began planning. Few people outside Hollywood understand what sound designers do. We don't just create noise. We manufacture fear, tension, anticipation. For 35 years, I engineered the sounds of disaster, the groan of a bridge moments before collapse, the shriek of cables about to snap. Now I would use those skills to make the Silver Pine chairlift unrideable. Using directional speakers, frequency modulation, and a few tricks I'd picked up designing 5.1 surround experiences, I created a soundscape that would only be audible from the lift, not from the ground, not at the base stations. Passengers would hear subtle creaks, metal fatigue, the haunting whine of overstressed cables, all randomized, undetectable as artificial. The grand opening arrived. Clarissa was glowing, local press in tow. I let the lift run normally for the first hour. Then, as the third loop passed over my house, I triggered the first sequence. Passengers froze. Conversations died. Some clutched their safety bars. One woman pointed to a tower, her face pale. By the fourth pass, the first panic erupted. A retired engineer riding with his grandson hit the emergency stop. The evacuation took 2 hours. Clarissa assured riders everything was fine. Inspectors found nothing wrong. The next day, the lift reopened, but riders were nervous. Then came the TikTok videos. Teenagers capturing the creepy lift sounds. Hundreds of thousands of views. Then blog posts, forum threads, and ski forums calling Silver Pine the haunted lift. Ridership plummeted. Inspections increased. Still, nothing was found. My system remained invisible, operating only during key times and under certain weather triggers. Clarissa hired specialists. They replaced parts, recalibrated sensors, and swept for interference. Nothing. They even installed cameras on the towers. Eventually, the HOA announced an emergency fee assessment. The chairlift wasn't generating revenue. It was draining the community dry. At the next meeting, Tom Albright stood and presented an independent audit. "We've spent over $120,000 in unplanned maintenance in 6 weeks. I motion that we suspend lift operations pending a full third-party review." Clarissa resisted. Another homeowner called for a vote of no confidence. The meeting exploded. Soon after, Tom invited a few of us to a private gathering. He had uncovered that the lift had bypassed mandatory environmental review, that permits were rushed, and that no community-wide vote had occurred for this million-dollar project. Complaints were filed. Investigations began. The county suspended the lift's operating permit. The final blow came from a forensic audit. Funds had been misused. Contracts awarded without bids. The HOA board was removed. Tom became interim president. He approached me privately. "We know what you did. We can't prove it. But we know." "Then you also know why," I said. He nodded. "We're considering rerouting the lift. If the sounds stop, we might afford it." "I support responsible development," I replied. "With proper setbacks." 2 days later, the HOA announced a renovation plan. The lift would bypass all homes. Construction would start in spring. Miraculously, the sound stopped. Today, Silver Pine is peaceful again. The lift follows a scenic route far from homes. Clarissa and her allies sold their properties. Helen's garden flourishes. My workshop is a community hub. The legend of the haunted chairlift lives on. Some say it was ghosts. Others whisper about sabotage. I say nothing. But beneath a rock near my fence is one weatherproof speaker. I've never needed it again, but I sleep better knowing it's still there. Just in case.